Right, so I'll just give it 1 more minute for people to turn up as to whoever would like to be turning up. For the people who are here, this is obviously a live session. It is something that's going to be going out and recording. If you do want to interact, do feel free to put in messages or to unmute yourself at times, or potentially come to video if you want to. But just be mindful that if you do that, then when it does go out in terms of people being able to watch it back, that your information would be on there. So completely up to you. So I think we'll probably start getting into things. I'll let more people come in as and when they turn up. A little bit of a disclaimer, if it's okay, just at the start. If anybody does follow me on social media or anything like that, you will know that at the moment my father is quite poorly. Not expecting anything to sort of like intervene in the session or anything like that. If I do suddenly get an urgent call, then I will have to end the session, unfortunately. But then what I'll do is I'll re-record it while I'm away from everybody else and get it sorted. What I would do is just from the start, I'd probably just mute myself and toddle away with the phone and leave you to sort of like have a bit of a chat with everybody, Lee. And then if obviously I needed to go, I would go. But fingers crossed, we're not going to be in that situation. So, Lee, would you like to do the opening bit, if that's okay?
Yeah, of course. Welcome, everyone, whether you're watching live or on demand. These sessions are absolutely fantastic, and I'm really, really chuffed to be involved getting the easy part just as the kind of co-host. As I've said in the chat already, all questions are welcome. No question's a daft question. Don't be shy to come forward. You can come on screen, as Catherine said, or you can put it in the chat and I'll look out there too. This morning's session, I have some affinity with, having really struggled last year with mental health personally for various reasons, which I was very public about on LinkedIn. But beyond that, I'm incredibly, I'm such a fanboy of protection, having grown up through that side in the business. So I'm genuinely, I always look forward to these, but this one particularly resonates with me. So on that note, and I'll go off screen while Catherine's talking. Nobody wants to be sitting looking at me with a face for radio, but on that note, I will pass things over to you, Catherine. Looking forward to this immensely.
Thank you, Lee, and obviously thank you for sharing that personal experience. As most people would know about myself as well, I've lived with generalized anxiety disorder for many years now. And, it is something that, I'm very mindful that I have been that client who's had to answer mental health questions for insurance, and it's not particularly easy. And I've been obviously the advisor for many people. I do help significant amount of people with mental health conditions trying to get insurance. And it's always important. We will mainly be talking about income protection today, but some of this information will float over as well to the other sides of protection insurance, your life and your kick side of things too. So the really key thing when we're looking at these insurances, especially from like a pre-sales type of approach, is that we need to be managing clients' expectations. If somebody has a mental health condition right at this moment, especially for income protection, it's quite likely that there's going to be a mental health exclusion. Not always. I will go through what we would be expecting in certain situations, but everybody is case by case, so we can never say for definite. If you are really working in this space and you work a lot with mental health, then you can probably get to the point where very early on, those initial conversations with clients, you'd be able to go, do you know what, this is probably going to be a mental health exclusion, but only once you are really experienced in this area, because, we don't want to put people off, but we also just want to make sure that we're handling that conversation sensitively. So key things that we're going to be asking people when it comes to mental health, and there's always a bit of a theme with these kinds of questions when it comes to underwriting, is, what have you been diagnosed with? When were you diagnosed with it? What are your symptoms? Is there any medication? Ideally, the dosage amount, as well as knowing the name of the medication. And it's the name of the medication is really quite important for the mental health side of things as well. And I'll go through that a little bit more in a bit. There's just certain ones that kind of would stand out as, okay, this is maybe not just a sort of like a low, I want to say a low level. It's like the symptoms maybe aren't as strong, in a sense. You've got higher symptoms, higher, I don't want to say higher risk conditions for insurance. From an insurance term, they would be seen as a higher risk, but I feel that's really unfair to kind of say that based upon the medical condition. But obviously we are talking from an insurance point of view, which is quite tricky. But there are some mental health conditions that do typically lead to a higher risk of claim. So some of sometimes the medication might not necessarily mix up and match with what you're hearing from a client. We just need to be mindful of those. Key things are time off work as well. If you've got somebody with a mental health condition and they had some time off work 5 years ago, that's very different to somebody who's maybe had, a couple of months off work in the last year or something. It's showing that the insurers like to see, how much is this affecting this person right now? What are those symptoms now? Is it well controlled? Engaging with medication is not seen as a negative when it comes to protection insurance. A lot of people seem to think when you chat to them, oh, but I don't take medication anymore, because there is this stigma about mental health and medication. There are some mental health conditions where insurers would actually, they want that medication to be in place. They want this person to be doing cognitive behavior therapy. And that's not to say that they wouldn't necessarily insure the person, but it's just that doing that engagement can really show the insurer, right, this person is really aware of their mental health, how it can affect them. They are taking those bits of time to just sort of like really focus on their mental health, learn these techniques, keep using them, which again, kind of from the risk and the statistics part, from the insurance point of view, is extremely positive. So again, we might be able to go into that a little bit as well. We are going to be asking at some point about suicidal thoughts, self-harm, suicide attempts. Now, I'm really careful with that wording there. It's really, really important. I have said this on many, many things, and I will always keep referring back to it, it is easy to get the wording wrong when it comes to suicide attempts. So as an example, a lot of the time it used to be the phrasing, have you ever tried to commit suicide? And for some reason, commit suicide, it's sounds strange, but it's what's known as, it's kind of like a bit of a normative language and use of wording. It's something that has been used for decades, but it's actually seen as a real negative to say it that way, because the word commit likens it to an illegal act, which then has religious connotations. So you can potentially really offend somebody if you say commit suicide. So what we do is we always try and say attempt suicide. You will notice I believe that all insurers, I do believe all insurers now have it as attempt suicide rather than commit. We also want to, and this is again with any medical condition, is avoid the word of suffer. How long have you suffered with depression or suffered with panic attacks, things like that, suffered with schizophrenia. We don't want to say the word suffer. And unfortunately, some insurers question sets still use that wording. But what we can do is say, how long have you lived with depression? How long have you lived with this? It's just a slight change in wording, but it's not negative. It's actually I hope you can see that it's a positive terminology that's being used. It's not saying that, suffer just sounds really negative, basically. So we've got to be trying to avoid that as much as possible. When we are doing our research, obviously, we're going to have all that information to hand. Also, things like, have they seen a psychiatrist? If somebody has told you that they have anxiety and depression and they've seen a psychiatrist, then that is one of those things where you might just want to delve in a little bit more. A lot of the time, we wouldn't expect a psychiatrist to be involved with anxiety and depression or stress or bereavement. Just because psychiatrists on the NHS would not usually become involved in that point. It would usually be psychologists, GPs, cognitive behavior therapists. So if somebody's telling you that they've seen a psychiatrist and the mental health condition isn't one where a psychiatrist would typically be involved, then it can be worth just checking them. Can I just check, was that on the NHS? Was that private? Because a lot of people do engage with them privately, and that is different when it comes to the outcomes. So, you get the same thing with some heart conditions. There's some heart procedures that can happen. And if it was done on the NHS, it means that it's been reactive, it's been a very serious situation, but the person might have gone privately and it might have been preventative rather than reactive. So it can really change the outcome. So it's just quite a good one to sort of bring in there. And that won't be in the insurer's question sets if you use their applications. That's just you just knowing how to do that, knowing how to ask that from the start. What I would say is when you're starting to do the application, and it's a really it can be tricky sometimes to do this, but it often fits quite nicely, is that once you've answered, have you had anxiety, stress, depression, you only need to answer that once. So you can find, and it can be a bit tricky because you can sometimes get an insurer saying, have you taken any medication for the last, that's lasted more than 4 weeks in the last so many years, at which point you'd be saying, yes. And it'd be like, well, what was it about? And you've got, well, anxiety. But then a few things later, you'll have another question saying, have you experienced anxiety in the last 5 years, which is also a yes. But all we're doing there is doubling up in terms of what we're saying. If you've said yes already and already said about the anxiety, all the questions that are needed are going to be coming up to you, and it's going to be reactive in that insurer's application. So you will answer all of them anyway. You can say yes the second time when there's specific anxiety questions, but what you will find is that you will then have a double up of all the questions that you've answered, asked the client already, which will be the things like how many days off work, sometimes lifestyle factors. It'll be asking about the self-harm, suicide thoughts, any suicide attempts. So you can find that you're going through all those again. And when it comes to mental health, big thing, especially if you do any mental health training, if you speak to any charities, is to not ask or not repeat what you're asking more than once. We don't want this person to keep having to go through and saying again and again these answers. So if you answer yes a second time, just say to them, look, it's just asking me all the questions again. I am just going to add in and repeat what we've said before. So just try and remember those answers. If you can't remember them, obviously you will need to ask them again. But as I say, once it's in there the first time, it's always a case of once you've already said it, we've already got that information into the insurer. A really interesting set of things as well, just because of things that can slightly come into the mental health question set, is things like autism and ADHD diagnosis. So most of us will be familiar in the have you ever questions. They'll often be, have you ever seen a psychiatrist? Of some sort of question along that line. Well, if you have autism, if you have ADHD, you will have seen a psychiatrist at some point. Just to be very clear, autism is not a mental health condition. It is a neurodiverse condition, it's neurodevelopmental. So it will be that, yes, you need to prepare the person to say, look, there is this question coming up. It does ask about a psychiatrist. It is worded more towards mental health. But because of the autism, I know it's not a mental health condition, but because they're asking about the psychiatrist at this point, we need to say yes. It'll ask about the autism. It'll then do reactive questions and just say it might do reactive questions based more upon a mental health situation rather than autism. Unfortunately, that's just the way that the questions go. Majority of people are absolutely fine if you explain it that way to them. And they do appreciate that, the insurer systems are going to be asking things in certain ways. Psychiatrist often is to do with mental health, so they will understand that. On the ADHD side of things, that's a little bit trickier in some ways because ADHD, it is a form of neurobehavioral disorder. And there's, if you do any research on ADHD, you will see that different organizations, different charities, different medical organizations across, lots of different countries, some of them will say it's mental health, some of them will say it's neurodiverse, and it's really, really tricky. So if you look at the ones in the UK, it's like more like the NHS type thing. It does say neurobehavioral, so it does sit in there. There are times when I've seen insurers treat it more as a mental health condition rather than as a neurodiverse condition. So it's just, again, just being a bit mindful of that. It can be, on the ADHD side of things, it can actually be quite upsetting for people if it's been indicated to them that it's a mental health condition. So again, just go back to it's because you've seen a psychiatrist and it's just sitting within that set. We don't need to be going into the whole, there's this, they're going to be potentially considering this as mental health. But what we might need to do is, again, just prepare them in terms of the exclusions, because with the ADHD, we can at times find that there'll be mental health exclusions on an income protection policy, which again can be quite upsetting for people. It's never pleasant having any kind of exclusion on there. For people who have mental health and, definitely a condition that's mental health, they will often understand that there's going to be a mental health exclusion, and they will appreciate and say, absolutely, I have this condition already. I appreciate that. You will get some people who don't want to have that exclusion on there. Naturally, nobody wants to have it on there, but you will sometimes get people who really, really don't want to have it on there. And at times, you know, it can actually be quite an early conversation with your clients. You know, I was helping somebody a couple of months ago. They came to me, initial conversation, you know, actively has depression. It is managed with medication, but it's something that's been there for quite a long time. And it was that conversation of saying, well, there is going to be a mental health exclusion on the policy from the start. I was able to say that, knowing very early on that that would be a case before I'd even done my research. And they said, but I don't want that. And, you know, obviously you have a really empathetic situation, a conversation with them, and just say, well, unfortunately, I do appreciate that, but there is still many things that you can claim on. You know, significant amount of things that you could potentially claim on, but unfortunately, right at this moment, the types of policies that we can access, you know, on the personal income protection market would be having an exclusion there. And they just simply didn't want that. And it's one of those things, and I'm sure, Lee, you'll agree with me, and I did this in a talk recently, you know, we're not going to be able to insure everybody exactly how they want to be insured. There's going to be people who do not want what's available based upon either the limitations of the products that there are, of their situation. It might be health, it might be residency, it might be to do with you know, income levels. You know, it's really important in terms of income protection. There's been times that I've had people come to me wanting me to do income protection to protect state benefits, and that's not what income protection's for. So there are going to be times where ourselves, the client, has to step away because it's just not going to work. And if you are in a situation where, you know, there is going to be a mental health exclusion, if you know from the very start that person is going to not want that, then it might be a conversation of maybe doing a little bit of research, depending upon the situation, because there are some times that we can get it without the exclusion. I will go through that, but it might be that it's in some ways quite a quick conversation. So unfortunately, there's just that isn't what is available in the market right now. The Association of British Insurers, the ABI, did do some mental health training a little while ago. I've forgotten the exact name of it. And it was all to do with improving the standards in our industry in terms of the languages, in terms of how we approach with clients, being able to understand more in terms of the mental health side of things. I would suggest I'm actually trained as a mental health first aider. It is something that if you're going to do it, there are lots of organisations that say they do mental health first aider training. But what you want to do, if you do want to have a look at that, is to find out and make sure that you choose somewhere that is approved by what's known as the MHFA, the Mental Health Foundation Association in the UK, in England, because they are the ones that approve the official ones that do that. Because there are times that you could potentially get training and it's not officially recognised. That gives you a really good idea as to, it is more to do with like high risk situations with people, but it does give you understanding of some mental health conditions, just like a better understanding of them in a sense, knowing what to do, which can help as well in terms of conversations. Touch wood, very much touching wood. I am obviously known as helping people very much in more like the health condition space. I am very much known as the advisor who helps with mental health conditions. And touch wood, I've not had situations where I've needed to go into the mental health first aider mindset and an approach. So it is something that it would be I think be unusual for you to come across it, but it is important to be very aware that these things can happen. And it's important to know how to handle that for the client, but also for yourself, because I always say this, there is so much focus on client vulnerability, which is absolutely brilliant. And it's really does need to be there. But advisor vulnerability is often ignored. It is incredibly important that you know how to look after yourself, look after your team if they come across any situation. And that can be a mental health vulnerability. It might actually be that your advisor or yourself is speaking to somebody who's been diagnosed with cancer, and actually you've had cancer in the past and they're talking about their treatment. And you know what, maybe you've been absolutely fine for 15 years. It was a good while ago, you passed it, but actually, for whatever reason, this conversation's too much. And, you know, you need to have some kind of support system in place to help you to just know how to process what you're hearing. So we're really conscious of that. We also want to be conscious of insurers' questions. So I, a few years ago, did inform an insurer that I wasn't best pleased with their their choice of wording on their application. I checked it 3 weeks ago, it's still there. Maybe if the insurer watches this, they'll know that I'm still referring to it. But as an example, sometimes you'll put in a mental health condition in insurer systems and it doesn't show up and you get a scroll down list. You probably don't want to read that scroll down list out fully, or be very careful and mindful of what you're reading out, because there is one insurer that has mental retardation still on their list, which is not appropriate and really does need removing if you are watching this insurer, and you will know who you are because I've raised it previously. We might have time limits as well on the questions. So, you know, suicide attempts, self-harm, thoughts, they might, if they're not in the last 5 or 10 years, some insurers won't be asking, some will. So, you know, it's that thing of making sure that you know the client's information. So when did this happen? And then having a look around, seeing what the insurer's question sets are. The mental health questions are usually quite early on, so you don't necessarily need to go all the way through an application. But you can start to sort of like maybe go in and go, right, okay, yes, there is a mental health condition, there was this, and see what that timing is that they're wanting to know, which is quite useful. You can also as well say some of them are time frames, some of them don't ask about thoughts, some of them don't necessarily ask about attempts. They will maybe say, have you planned sort of like harming yourself, which is quite different to an attempt. And then you'll have some that'll say, have you planned this to the point that you need to support from a medical professional, which again is very, very different in terms of what a person's situation is. Now, what I would say, and it's not advised to ask somebody about their how their manner of attempt or harm was. Some people will just tell you, and they will tell you anything and everything. Other people will be quite guarded. One thing to know, and I appreciate, I'm sorry for the bluntness of this and expressing it, but there are, in terms of attempts, there are different assessments when it comes to attempts. So there are assessments for non-violent attempts, which would be somebody taking tablets to overdose. And then there's violent attempts, which would be other manners, which I'm sure we can all guess what they would be. The violent attempts across all the products, protection products, are considered to be a higher risk. So the insurers do assess them differently. So you might do your research and they might say, well, actually, based on this situation, because they will often assume non-violent attempts. So they would maybe say, we expect it to be, I don't know, let's say plus 100 on the premium. And if it ends up that it was a violent attempt, it can be that that does change. So it's always a good idea to give your client a bit of a leeway with the premium, just in case that is different. And again, be mindful that some people, say, won't want to tell you much. Other people might tell you quite significant details about what's happened in their past. And it's just important to be aware of that. If it is going to go for a GP report, the insurer is going to find out as to probably the detail. So it is going to be discussed at some point, very likely, with the underwriters. But we wouldn't be saying to somebody, can I just check you've had a suicide attempt? Well, how did you do that? You know, that wouldn't be a conversation that comes up at all. It's too personal, too private. And whilst we need to ask these questions, we need to make sure that we're not doing anything that could be significantly triggering for this person. I always like to do it as well, where I say, I'm going to prepare you for the next stage. So I'm going to ask, you know, what is it? When was it diagnosed? Ability to work, medications. And then I'll say, right, I'm going to need to ask you now the more in-depth mental health questions. Is that okay? And I always say we can stop at any point. You know, if it's not comfy talking about this, also give them the option to potentially do it through password protected documents, because sometimes people are better doing it written down rather than over the phone. It maybe feels they can sometimes worry about being judged if it's face-to-face or over the phone. So the next set of questions would be psychiatrist inpatient treatment as well, being under the care of a community mental health team. The community mental health team can be quite tricky because some people will maybe see a counsellor or psychologist at hospital. It's not necessarily community mental health team, but it also can be. But the community mental health team is usually where there's quite a bit of engagement. They're seeing them very much at the start, quite regularly. They are there because they are just monitoring to see if this person does actually need to maybe go and stay in hospital for a bit. And then after that, I'll say, and now these are the most in-depth ones. And I'm sorry that I need to be asking them. And that's when you'd be asking about the thoughts, the self-harm and the attempts. We will need to know how many of each of those things has happened and when they've happened as well. So in terms of outcomes, okay, mental health exclusions and income protection, and you'll find these as very similar if you try and do waiver of premium on Life and Kick as well. It is going to be saying things like, we will not pay out for anxiety, depression. It usually includes chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, functional neurological disorders as well, and more. It's a paragraph, it's a chunk. So it isn't just, you look at it and you think, this doesn't feel just like mental health. It feels like quite an extra set of things. Unfortunately, that is what we're going to get. So it is important to say to the client early on, it is going to say mental health, but they do kind of add in a few extra things as well. But let's just have a look, see what happens. And then when the exclusions are in, we can then decide as to what feels right and go forward from there. We might have, if there's an exclusion, not all insurers, but some insurers will actually reduce the premium by about 5 to 10%. And the reason being is that the biggest claims for income protection are mental health and back. So they know that when they are putting an exclusion on for mental health, that actually one of the biggest reasons that this person is likely to claim on, whether or not they have a mental health history or not, is being removed from the policy set. So some of them will reduce the premiums, not all of them. We're going to potentially automatic declines across full income protection. So there can be options, but in your mainstream full income protection, we are going to find things like schizophrenia, recent self-harm or attempts are going to be something that are going to be covered. Also things like outstanding referrals for ADHD. And the reason being, and this isn't necessarily something to say to somebody who has an outstanding referral for ADHD, but just to give you that insight, is that in terms of the behavioural aspects that can come with ADHD, it can also be potentially, if there's tumours in the brain, can be affecting the way that someone's behaviour is. So what they are wanting to do is the insurer wants to make sure, is this ADHD or is something else going on? We want to make sure, and not just necessarily tumours, there can be a whole multitude of things. It's just that that's probably one of the easiest ones to show us, like as an example. And so they just want to make sure actually, so what is going on? Because obviously options are very different between whether or not there's ADHD, if there's a tumour, if there's a different type of mental health condition there that they want to know about, and being able to really understand the risk that the insurer is taking on. And as well, in terms of medication, lithium. So this is the one that really stands out generally with mental health. If somebody has anxiety, depression, they're saying to you they have barely any symptoms, they don't really need to have follow-ups, everything is fine, they're working completely. And then when you check the medications, they're actually on lithium. Lithium is not a go-to option for mental health. It is something that is used for mental health, and it is incredibly beneficial for some mental health conditions, and really, really useful, but we wouldn't expect it for anxiety and depression. It needs a psychiatrist to be able to diagnose it. So if somebody's saying, I've not seen a psychiatrist, I've not seen that, then something isn't matching up in terms of the information. And what you can just say is, right, well, I just need to clarify. So the underwriters, in terms of lithium, they would usually expect that to be conditions that aren't, anxiety, depression. Can I just double check, when have you seen a psychiatrist? And if they're still saying there's not a psychiatrist there, then what we're going to just, I would say at that point, just take all the information away, do speak with an underwriter to get some clarification. But, we're probably going to need to go back to the clients and say, look, unfortunately, at the moment, I can't get an accurate indication because of the fact that the underwriters are saying that they're not sure why lithium has been, prescribed when there's not been a psychiatrist involved. It could be that this person's quite confused in terms of what their diagnosis is, but lithium is definitely a medication that would stand out. Some of the conditions I'm going to be discussing where we can potentially look at options, it might be that lithium is there, but your stress, your bereavement, anxiety, depression, we're more going to be thinking things like fluoxetine, citalopram, things that are known as SSRIs. And if need be, if the client's saying a name to you and you're not sure what it is, do a quick Google, put like mental health and type out what you think they're saying, and you'll usually get the medication pop up, so it's easier for you to see as to what they're referring to. Another thing as well to be very mindful of is the mixture with alcohol and drugs. So I always double check, because when I always say I always double check these things, it's because I've had this situation where I've done the research, so I've then gone to app and something's popped up that's massively changed something. So alcohol and drugs, when I'm doing my research, pre-sales research with somebody, and I'm getting that information before I'm doing the application, how much alcohol do you drink in any given week on average? And I always say, have you ever been advised to reduce? That's really, really important. Have you ever taken recreational drugs? And I did have something not long ago, and someone says, well, what do you do if you think that someone has taken recreational drugs? And that's a bit of a tricky one, but sometimes we do need to just ask back. So I do a lot of my research chats with clients on the phone, and there has been times where I've said, have you ever taken recreational drugs? And there's a pause, and it's a pause that's a bit longer than you'd expect for someone to just answer no or yes. It's maybe 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and they'll come back and go, no. And I'll go, and you just say, like, I'm saying, I hope it's okay, but there was a bit of a pause there. Can I just double check? Is this a no? And then you'll either get people go, no, it is a no. And then you kind of think, I wonder if it is a no. Or you'll get people go, well, you know what, I did do a bit of cannabis at uni. And you're like, okay, that's fine. I just needed to know, because then it just helps, in terms of what I'm looking at and picking the right insurer, which is really, really important. So do double check that. Insurers aren't particularly keen if there has been a lot of alcohol use in the past or any kind of advice, especially if the person is still drinking. So if someone's been advised to reduce the alcohol consumption, they're still drinking now, even if it's not much, it does sometimes potentially present an issue. And just be mindful as well that insurers, people often don't realise just how much they're drinking as well. So when you're finding out from them, they might tell you the units, but if you're getting told in terms of this many glasses of wine, this many beers, just calculate the units that you're seeing there, because, when we're starting to get towards mid to high 20s, that is when, again, it can start to be something that is a consideration, especially if there is mental health there. We are often going to get automatic declines if there's a mental health condition and a back condition as well. Like I said, they're the 2 main claim areas. If you have both of them, the insurer is going to say, well, we're taking out pretty much the main things that people are going to be claiming on, so we don't think it's worthwhile for the client to have this. There was a big debate about that, and I am working in the background about that with people, about, maybe people do want to have it, even if it is taking out those things. There's many, many situations still where they might need to claim on these insurances. So there is some debate, and there is potentially some movement in there at some point. It's very common to get through on the application, stress, anxiety, depression. Most of the time that will just be done and dusted, straight through your online applications. It can be, depending upon the timeframes, it can be anywhere from standard, without an exclusion. It could be that there's a premium increase. It could be that there's an exclusion. It could be a mix of premium increase and exclusion. You can find that isolated stress and bereavements won't lead to an exclusion, even if it is sort of like a bit closer than time-wise than other things as well. We do now have, in the last couple of years, potential for insurance for people with bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder. Now, again, it would be, possibly an exclusion, possible loading, depending upon the situation. This is where we might be seeing that lithium, but again, it's not to say that it rules it out, because that is seen as a recognised treatment for conditions that do, generally need to have medication there to really help the person. And just be mindful as well that if you are coming across bipolar or borderline personality disorder, you can often find that self-harm and attempts have happened in the teenage years, because it's those things that have happened, and often quite a few in quick succession, that has actually ended up leading to the diagnosis. And unfortunately, it's usually that set of offence that would be the time that the person is really listened to, and those things are taken into account. When you are given an exclusion on these things, and this again applies for anything, I would say, any kind of risk, especially on the health side, is right, okay, so we have an exclusion for mental health as an example. When will this end? So we say to the underwriters, when will this not be an exclusion? So, somebody's had bereavement, let's say, but let's say it lasted quite a bit as an example, and the insurers are going, what, we actually just, because it was so recent, it's lasted quite a while, they've had to have time off work a bit longer than, than we would usually see, we do feel that we need to put a mental health exclusion on and just go, okay, so how long for? Is this, if we apply again in a year's time or 2 years' time, could this potentially not be an exclusion? And they might say that they'll generally say maybe, but as long as the symptoms haven't gotten worse, that they're doing okay, that they've still been able to stay in work, things like that. And so you might be able to go, right, okay, to the client, right, at the moment it's an exclusion, but if we chat again in a year's time, we might be able to do this without an exclusion. So I think it's worth doing that. Let's put this in as now, as kind of thinking of it as a bit of a temporary solution, but at least we're getting it now, we're locking premiums in place, you're getting cover for the majority of things, but let's have a chat again in a year's time. I've had that with somebody who'd had significant stress, unbelievable stress, they were a doctor, and it was during lockdown, and they were just outside of their training, just approved to be a doctor. COVID happened, lockdown happened, and they were responsible for 3 wards of patients, and obviously people were dying, and they were the only doctor on that ward. Significantly intense stress, and the argument to the insurers was, surely anyone in that situation would have experienced stress, regardless of just being a brand new doctor and anything like that. All the health professionals during that time, it must have been horrific for them. And the insurers was like, we agree at this moment, because of the timeframes and our rules, we need to put an exclusion on there. If you chat to us in 4 months' time, we'll be able to take the exclusion off, which is what we approached and did. And also as well, always check out your simplified routes. So we do have in the friendlies, simplified routes where there can be more options at times. It does come down to the type of diagnosis, the treatments, things like that. But it might be that you're thinking, actually, we can't do this mainstream. We can't get full income protection. So why don't we try some of the other options, which can be useful? Again, they would have the exclusions for pre-existing conditions until certain timeframes have passed. But it's worthwhile taking a look. So on the last thing here, looking at the claims. Okay, so somebody's come to you. So let's not assume that at the moment that they have mental health already, but they've come to you because they have income protection and they've now developed a mental health condition, and we're going to be helping them. So do remind them of the value-added benefits. We could have access to mental health support. Mental health support through value-added benefits, I've been very vocal about this, are quite limited. If there's certain levels of mental health, in terms of if they have developed a mental health condition, they have potentially had thoughts, they've maybe harmed or attempted to die, then a lot of the mental health support services that I'm familiar with in terms of the value-added benefits would not offer support to that person. They would say it was too intense for their team to be able to look after, which is again something that I'm working on in terms of clarity for people as to what these value adds do and don't offer. But we're going to offer them things like that. We do have things like, we have Best Doctors, we have Red Arc nurses, we have Square Health, lots and lots of different ones that can step in and provide the support that we're wanting to do. If you're able to, resource-wise, offer to support them through that claim, help them with the claim forms, be the person that is going to be the middle person between them and the claims people, so that you can keep going back to the insurer, like, when is this getting sorted? What are the timeframes? Also ask them what they feel they need. Do they want you to contact them once a week, or right at this moment, do they need it every couple of days to just know what's happening in terms of the insurer's process? Do they want to not have contacts? Is it too much and they just want you to have the claim forms and contact them when it's, in a sense, it's done and dusted? We wouldn't just say that, we would say to them, oh, you don't want me to contact too often, okay, but you would still contact, quite regularly in many ways, just to make sure that they know what's happening. And it's quite likely, as with most claims, that you would need to consider this client to be vulnerable, at least at the initial stage. It is a very sensitive topic when we talk about mental health. Somebody might tell you lots. They might not tell you anything. They might want to talk to you by email. They might want to talk to you on the phone. Really important as well to make sure that whoever's doing that doesn't kind of go into almost a bit of like a dependent to this person, or even like a bit of a counsellor role, which can potentially happen, and you do need to have some support structures in place to just know that there is that line where we can offer support, but then, you know, we can't stay on the phone for, say, like 3 hours at a time or something. We need to be able to say, right, you know, this needs to, leave it with me now, I'll be able to sort this, and be very, very reactive to their needs. And obviously make sure whoever's helping them through that claim process does have support either internally or externally to, again, process whatever's being discussed with them. Mental health can happen for many different reasons. It might be a reason that is, you know, there could be a boss that's just not being pleasant. It could be a colleague that's not being pleasant, or it might be that this person has experienced a significantly horrible life event, and, you know, that they need a lot more support. So we'll just see how we go. Just to sort of like finish off with some last bits, stress is a big topic when it comes to income protection, and there's been a lot of debate. And I've been chatting to lots of insurers and reinsurers about this. Stress in itself is considered to be a symptom and not a mental health condition. So being signed off work with stress does not automatically mean that you are going to get a claim on income protection. The insurer is going to be looking at it on a case-by-case basis. And my argument about this is sort of like saying, well, if it's a symptom, then why is it listed on the question set of have you ever experienced stress, anxiety, depression? Because anxiety and depression are mental health conditions. Stress is a symptom. So don't we ask about panic attacks and things like that? I don't think I'm necessarily popular at times when I'm challenging these things with insurers and underwriters. However, there has been a very significant set of discussions in the background in the industry for about the last year or so. And what we do have is the Protection Distributors Group are going to be putting out some guidance for advisors on what to do about things like stress. But it's quite important, if you're doing income protection, is to just be mindful to say, you know, obviously things like, you know, you might be saying things like mental health are covered if this person doesn't already have it, but just sort of like, but things like stress can be, you know, it depends upon the situation. So some insurers will not pay out for stress. Some will do it on a case by case. And unfortunately, it's not particularly easy to know which insurers are doing which when it comes to that. So it is important to maybe start and see to do your research as to sort of like which insurers' approaches take what, because that might lead you to then decide, well, actually, for my clients, this one over here is the cheapest. However, I know that stress might not be covered. So I'm going to suggest we go for this one because I know that they say that stress is a covered condition. You know, they would class it as a condition and pay out. And also as well, just another one is having a sick note, again, doesn't automatically mean that somebody's going to get an IP claim. It does depend upon the situation. There's quite a lot of discussion, debate at the moment, because there has been that thing of like moving sick notes potentially away from GPs to occupational therapists, to physiotherapists, people like that. And that is going to bring a whole new dynamic as to how IP claims are being assessed. That's me sort of like saying everything that I need to say. I hope it's been helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to just mention them. Or Lee, I know you usually have a question for me after my rambling. You've usually spotted something that you'd like to ask on. So fire away.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to pick up on, I mean, this is such a big subject, and it's probably one of the most sensitive subjects that any advisor, be it protection or wealth advisor who does protection, would ever get involved in. Do you as part of what you do with your experience, do you express how important it is to do full disclosure? You know, we touched on drugs, we touch on potentially self-harm, we touch on potentially suicide. There's so many really sensitive subjects there that many people will be uncomfortable about relating even many years down the line. I just wondered, just in the round, how you might approach that.
Absolutely. So I think for a lot of people, when they come to me, they've often already tried somewhere else, and they've not had the outcome that they wanted, or they've come from a charity, you know, potentially mental health charity. So I know that there's going to be something there. When you do a protection insurance application at the start, there is kind of like a standard disclaimer that you need to say as an advisor, saying you must be truthful and honest, or else a claim might not go ahead. I tend to say to people from the start, when I do my initial chat with somebody, I'm not going through an insurer's application set because there's too many questions and it could waste everybody's time. And I'll just say to them, right, do you have any medical conditions? And I always say, I was like, and please just tell me anything and everything, because then I know what the insurer needs to know and what they don't need to know. Because there's things that people have that don't need to come up in the application, again, due to timeframes, or it might just not even come up in the question set.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do that. And, we always say, obviously, again, just be as truthful to the best of your knowledge. The difficulty you can really have is, and it is really hard, is that to the best of your knowledge. Because, when the insurers say, have you seen a doctor in this many years? A lot of people are like, I haven't got a clue. Some people are like, well, I haven't seen a doctor in 10 years. And you're like, well, fair enough. But a lot of us will speak to a doctor about different things at different times. And, it could be something so simple as, I had a twinge in my back. And so I said to the GP, I've had a twinge in my back for a week. What should I do? Oh, they just want you to have a bit of physio session. Wonderful. And you might not know where that time frame is. So we just have to do it, as I say, at best to our knowledge. It is tricky though. Most people will share, but depending upon how much they want to share is quite different. As I say, sometimes you get very shut down, one word answers. You do need, especially mental health, offer all those different options. Do they want a video call? They might want to see you and just know who they're speaking to, know that it's a real person. They might want telephone because, as I say, they might think it's less judgmental. They might want to all buy electronic documents. Again, it's just making sure that you respond to that, and people will do that in different ways. And one of the things that I've said as well is, so I had an introducer speak to me recently, and they were chatting about, oh, well, there's this in the history and that, how would you want to do it? Do you want to, and they were sort of like, do you want to send the questions by the introducer so they can get all the information first, or do I want to go straight to the client? And usually I do say a lot of the time, look, can I send over the questions so you can get the information, so I can, before you introduce them to me, I can say, yes, I can or can't do something. Because again, I don't want to waste anyone's time. But especially when it comes to mental health and some of the lifestyle factors that I mentioned as well, it can sometimes be that they want to come directly to somebody like me who they know is a specialist specifically in this area. Because you can find that with people, it's a case of, they're kind of like, well, look, you're my financial advisor and we're speaking about my pensions and investments. I don't want you to know about my mental health. I don't want you to know all these things I've experienced. I want it to be somebody that I can pretend is over there that I don't know, that I'm not going to see. And now, every time we have a meeting, I'm going to know that you know my deepest secrets. So it's just constantly being reactive to what that client needs. But the majority of mental health people are going to come across anxiety, stress, depression, bereavement. The stronger mental health conditions, actually, we don't tend to come across as much because there is, and obviously I work quite a bit with mental health charities as well, there is an automatic assumption that they're not going to be treated fairly.
Yeah.
And so they just, and it's really sad because they just don't even start the process. So it's just important, again, as advisors, that we're giving people that option. And let's say we're doing something with something like a mortgage, and obviously automatically in our industry, mortgage, partner, children, we're going to go life. And we might be thinking life and kick. Fine. Don't automatically ignore income protection because there is a mental health condition there. And just as a bit of an aside, going into the kick side of things, just be mindful that if you go for, say, like enhanced critical illness options, we can find that in enhanced critical illness contracts, you can include things like psychosis is a claimable condition. And what you can find is that can lead to there being an exclusion, because it'll be a psychosis exclusion. Whereas if you've gone for the core cover, there wouldn't be an exclusion because psychosis just isn't even covered on the core side. So probably gauge it, find out what your client feels, give them the options, explain the option to them, and go forward from there.
Brilliant. That's really useful. And actually, that's quite an interesting point. It's somebody that comes from the wealth advice end. That's despite my kind of leaning into protection so hard, that's a really important point, that some clients may just want to separate it out a bit. So that's quite important. So I think, are we pretty much at time?
Pretty much at time. Yeah.
Brilliant. So unless Gregory has any final comments or questions.
Probably there. Obviously, thank you for for attending, and we'll do the obviously I'll do the CPD certificate, and that will be available on the website shortly. Unfortunately, as I mentioned at the beginning, I am having some time pulling me away from work at the moment. It will be on there, and please do feel free to get that, watch the other episodes, and get your CPD that way too.
Okay, brilliant. Well, listen, again, Catherine, thank you. Another really cracking session. So thanks, Gregory, for turning up. Thanks for everyone in advance who will watch this on demand. And we'll hope to see you there for the next session.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. And have a lovely summer. We'll be back again after the summer. Bye, everybody.